In this video, we will show you how to replace your thermostat housing on this Dodge Ram with a 5.9 liter engine. This will be located along the front of your engine. Let's get into it. Okay friends, let's get started on our job. The first thing we'll do is make our way under the hood. We're looking for the fuse box. We'll lift this up by grabbing onto these two tabs and quickly have a look at the legend along the inside. What we're looking for is the fuel system relay, number 51 right there. Now, if we were to hold this right next to where the fuse box is, we're going to find that same relay. Go ahead and take hold of that, give it a little wiggle, and lift it up and out of there. A quick look for corrosion. We'll set this aside temporarily. Now we can hop inside the vehicle and attempt to start it. Now, once you attempted to start the vehicle and you found that it did not start and run, continue on by reinstalling that relay. You want to make sure you press it in there as far as possible so you're sure it's making complete contact. We'll put on the protective cover after that and move along to the negative battery terminal. To disconnect the negative battery terminal, I'll be using an 11mm wrench. I just want to loosen up this nut just enough that I can remove the terminal end from the battery. We'll set that aside so it's making no contact. Now we can start draining the coolant. To do that, we're going to open up the radiator cap. We'll give it a quick inspection and set that aside. Now we can make our way under the vehicle to start draining. From underneath the driver's side front corner of the vehicle is where you're going to find the drain on the radiator. Now, of course, you do want to have a collection bucket under this area, but I'm also going to use a drain hose so I can divert the coolant directly into my bucket without having to worry about anything. Now, as for the drain itself, I'll be using some pliers. I'm going to grab onto this area and turn this counterclockwise. Let's let that coolant drain. Once it stops draining, we'll close up that drain. Just turn that clockwise until it bottoms out. It's a good idea to use some pliers just to ensure that it is actually completely closed. There we are. Up inside the engine compartment, the next thing we want to pay attention to is your serpentine belt. Pay attention to the routing. It goes over some pulleys and under others. We're going to be removing the serpentine belt from this area. To do that, along the passenger side front, next to your ignition coil is where you'll find the tensioner. We're going to be using a 15mm to turn this clockwise, release tension, and then remove that belt. It's a good idea to fully remove the belt from the area so you can give it a thorough inspection and so it does not get any coolant on it. Now we can start removing the alternator from the area. To do this, you'll find that you have two 14mm headed bolts. There's one up along the top. The one down along the bottom, you'll be using two 14mm. One to hold the nut along the backside, and the other, of course, to unmount the bolt. Let's start with the lower one. Now with that one loose, let's make our way up to the top here. We'll give this a wiggle and remove the other mounting bolt. That one's considerably longer. Take hold of that starter. We're going to lift it up and out of the way. We can rest that on the side. Now that we have that out of the way, we have a clear view of the thermostat housing. To be able to gain a little bit better access to this, I'm going to remove this hose as well. This has an 8mm headed clamp holding the hose in place. You can also use a flathead screwdriver. Now we can start removing the hose from this area. To do that, you can either grab onto it, give it a little wiggle, see if you can break it free, use a hose pick, make your way under there, or even a pry bar. Whatever you do, be careful not to damage the hose. It is possible to still have a little bit of coolant in the system, so just keep that in mind. Now we can move along to removing the upper radiator hose from the thermostat housing. For this, you'll find that you have a clamp that you can squeeze. We'll move this clamp out of the way, and then we can pull that hose off of the thermostat housing. Slide this clamp right down there. You can leave that down there for now. Now we'll take hold of the hose, break it free, and lift that up and off. There we go, get a little bit of coolant out of there, that's okay. We'll give the hose a quick inspection, make sure it is still soft and pliable and it's not torn, worn, or damaged in any way. This looks fine. I'll set it aside. It's common to find that you still have coolant inside of the thermostat housing. If you happen to have something that you can draw it out of there, go ahead and do that now. We'll recycle that fluid properly. Now we can get that clamp out of there. Quick inspection. Make sure it is reusable, we'll set it aside. Now we'll pay attention to the engine where the thermostat housing is located. It's a good idea to make sure that there isn't too much debris around this area because you don't want anything to fall into the engine. Once you've done that, we'll continue on to removing two 13mm headed bolts that hold the thermostat housing down to the engine. Fine, you have one right back here. The second one is down inside this area. It's a little bit harder to get to. Once you have both of those out of there, you can take hold of that thermostat housing, we'll give it a wiggle, and lift it up and out of here. Once you have that removed, the next thing you'll want to do is remove the thermostat from the bottom of the housing. A quick inspection on that. If you're not replacing it, you're going to be reusing it. You want to make sure it's still in good condition. And there it is, friends. Now that we have the thermostat housing out of the way, the next thing you'll want to pay attention to is the intake where that thermostat housing and gasket will go. We'll be using a flat scraper and try to remove any of the existing debris or old gasket from the area. While doing so, I'm trying to scrape away from the inside of the intake. We'll give it a quick wipe and an inspection, and then we can prepare for our installation. Let's install our thermostat. Should fit right into this circular hole here. After that would come the gasket. Try to get this on, aligning our mounting bolt holes. Continue on to the thermostat housing. Looking at the housing itself, it has a small area that says front. We'll make sure that we put that in the proper placement. Front facing forward. With those mounting bolt holes lined up, we can start in each of our two mounting bolts. You want to make sure you start them both in before you snug either of them. Now that I have them both started, I can snug them up. Now that they're snug, let's make sure we torque them to 200 inch-pounds. Now that we've done that, we can start reattaching the upper radiator hose to the thermostat housing. We'll take that clamp, we're going to slide it over the housing. Bring the hose down into the proper position here. Now we can bring that hose clamp back up onto the hose. Double check to make sure the hose is completely secured. We'll get this hose on here, slide it down on there as far as possible, put the clamp back into its original position and tighten it up. Let's get that alternator in place. We'll get the bottom hinge bolt in. That's the larger one. Start on the mounting nut along the back. We're going to leave this loose and start in the upper one as well. Once both of them are started, we'll snug them up. Now that they're snug, let's just make sure they're nice and tight. Now we can install our serpentine belt. You remember as we were removing it, I had told you to make sure you put it back in the proper placement. Use our 14 millimeter, turn that tensioner all the way clockwise. Slide the belt into the proper position. Once you feel as though you have it in the right placement, you need to pay attention to each and every one of the pulleys. Some of the pulleys do have grooves on them. If your belt is off by even one groove, you're going to destroy your belt, so double check each and every one of them. Now the next thing we're going to do is fill the cooling system. There's a couple different ways that you'd want to do this. One would be with a funnel. You can go ahead and put the adapter right along the top here, install the funnel on there, and then continue adding coolant. Once it starts burping, what you would want to do is start up the vehicle and continue watching the fluid level. We want to try to burp out all the air bubbles that are in the system. Once all the air stopped coming out, you can use your little plunger here. We'll plunge that off and then remove this and install the cap. For me personally, I'm going to be using a vacuum system. I'll hook it up on here. It's going to draw a vacuum in the cooling system, and then I'll draw the coolant directly in and avoid any air bubbles. Now, once you're sure that it's nice and full, we'll continue on with that radiator cap. Put it on there, turn it all the way to the right until it's nice and tight. Double check it. Once you've done that, continue on to checking your coolant reservoir. That's just along the passenger side of the coolant fan shroud. Make sure it's up to par. If it needs to be added to, just go ahead and lift up on this yellow cap, add as much as needed, and then close it up good and tight. Now we can reconnect our negative battery terminal. These are 11 millimeter. Make sure this is nice and tight. Okay, friends, we've got the truck back together. At this point, what you want to do is start it up. You want to let it run for a little while. We're going to want to make sure that you double check that coolant level, make sure you don't have a misfire, and no check engine light. Aside from that, take your vehicle for a road test. Thanks for watching.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.